Frankie.
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie, I know you are excited because we are about to talk Florida Gator football.
Well, I'd be more excited if the story turned out differently, but
Yeah, for sure.
it's
So
like talking about lost promise in the Detroit Tigers or the Detroit Lions.
the Gators are prominent players in this story, but it doesn't end doesn't end well for
It's like talking about how great
nothing
Aaron
ends
Hernandez.
well for any party in this story. It's a bit of a depressing story, but I think it's got a hell of a career arc to it. And I think it has a lot of lessons people could heed in their career about
This
putting money at the tip top of their criteria factor and making a career decision.
this is about as uplifting as talking about the incredible career of tight end Aaron Hernandez while he was at Florida.
Hell of a tight end, great hands.
For those of you that are unaware, he had a great run at Florida, and he murdered someone, killed himself in his jail cell.
A lot of Florida Gator stories end the same way. Frank is one of the few Gators that have made it out of there, made it out of the swamp. That's why he got invited to a football game as one of their top 60 under 60, because he's one of the few that survived to his ripe old age.
My rap sheet is smaller than anybody else in the athletic department.
Spent no time in jail.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hey, Frank, by the way, speaking of spending time in jail, I do have a funny story on this. Do you have global entry, Frank?
Not yet.
Okay, so global entry, it's this long process.
You told me this story, but I would love to do it here.
It's like the next step from TSA pre-check. So it's like a pain in the ass. Took me forever to get an interview. Jenny long since gave up on me wanting to even do this. It just makes it easy to come in from customs. So
when you go out of the country, this is like the fast pass for coming in and out of the country. You got to scan your passport, and if you haven't done this whole process, I'll tell you a follow up to this.
Skip the lines, just like at Disney, just like TSA pre-check, same thing. But this is more coming in on customs. You don't wait in that long ass line with the rest of steerage on the boat that paid for the cheap seats. So Jenny and the kids have long since gone and done their interview, and they got their global entry. I was the one trailing, so I finally got downtown to go do it, and the lady working there is like, okay, going through, takes my ID. I think this is gonna be really quick. And she's like, you ever been arrested for anything or anything on your record, misdemeanors, felonies? I'm like, nope, which is always what I say when people ask stuff like that. And she goes, sure you haven't been arrested? And I'm like, did you say arrested or convicted? And she's like, I'm trying to whisper this because there's all these people behind me, and she's like, I asked you. And she like goes back through it again. And I'm like, all right, well, I might have been arrested, but I wasn't convicted for something. And she's like, rattles it off to me. And I'm like, thank God I did not do this with my family, my kids, my wife, because I had a bit of an incident about 20 years ago. And
it
wasn't on my record, was never
it wasn't 20.
It may or may not have happened, because it's not exactly on my record, but apparently the government does know I was arrested, even though there was no conviction. So let's just say that. We're going to leave that story for another time, Frank.
This is one of the times you got in trouble and I wasn't there to get your ass out of it.
So this is true. This is another great lesson for me in life is if you were gonna get into the bottle and have a good time tailgating, you should always have Frankie around because he will buy off whoever is about to get you in trouble. I didn't have Frank with me, and I got my ass in a little bit deeper than I
9.9 out of 10. I'm there. The one time I get too drunk, Ian just lets it happen.
Yeah, damn it. All right.
I think.
Well, anyway, so toast. We are. Frank actually put me onto the story at first. He's been following this for a while. This is a story about the recruitment of a star quarterback, high school kid. And I think before we get into the whole story of this quarterback,
I can set it up.
I think we need to step back a little bit and talk about name, image, and likeness. How much do you know about it, Frankie, the Supreme Court decision?
So a ton, right? So like, this is how this all started. So for years, the NCAA was capitalizing and kind of taking advantage, some would say, on college age kids. And what they were trading is they're giving you free room and board. They're giving you an education. You're going to come there and you're going to come to school and we're going to pimp you out and we're going to make a ton of money on you. So a famous example from our life, I'm going to lay out three things and we'll unpack all three and then we can kind of move forward. The three really interesting examples of this. When Ian and I were kids, we talked about this here before, we were huge fans of the Fab Five. Like they were the first time where it was like, these kids are bigger than anything else. And we all, like we were kids, we looked up to them. It was incredible.
Fab Five were 5 freshmen recruited to play, and they all started in the March Madness tournament for University of Michigan and got back-to-back into the finals as freshmen, which
they went to the Final Four as freshmen, they went to the Final Four as sophomores, and then one of them left. But like, this is the period where like it started to kind of come undone for the NCAA because they used to redshirt freshmen and they used to have all these controls. Like like I feel like what's happening as our society is people are getting more individual rights. And this has kind of followed that same trajectory. But in the late 80s, early 90s, these kids were stars and they couldn't afford to buy meals or get food, while the university was making tons and tons of money selling their jerseys and other things. They made a bunch of money by going to the Final Four. So that's one story. Then there's like video games, and video games started to get real, like real. Like they started to use like people's faces and images and all these other things. And what happened with this is they had these twin brothers that played for UCLA, and their names were the O'Bannons. One was like number 13, the other one was number 31. And they were good players. They were super, super popular, but they were not NBA quality guys. So what happened, I think, is they got out of school. They didn't make riches in the NBA, and they realized they kind of got screwed. Like the time where they had the ability to earn money was when they were at UCLA and they were getting pimped out, and they went to the Final Fours and they didn't make any money. And then EA Sports was using their images, charging a ton of money for these video games, giving the rights to the school and the Pac-10 or Pac-12 at the time.
And their face is straight up on the player.
That's right.
Their number and everything about every characteristic.
Number 13 was left-handed. Number 13, the video game, was left-handed. Like it was the people. Yeah. So what happened about 10 years after they graduated, and this was early 2000s, they filed a suit. And all this is kind of happening while Reggie Bush is taking money. Now, supposedly, like the NCAA cleaned it up. Like if you look at the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like there was people just getting bags of money or cars. Like 30 for 30 has talked about this a ton. So we got the two stories. Then we have another one, like the Reggie Bush thing is kind of coming out. And what happened is there's major legislation. They go to the courts and they say, you know what? The O'Bannons are right. They should have been paid. Tim Tebow should have gotten paid. Reggie Bush should have gotten paid. All these transcendent stars should have gotten paid. And what passed about 2 years ago is called NIL, name, image, likeness. So for the O'Bannons, they would have gotten money if the video game had used them and it was under the new law. But what's happened is it's gotten even seedier. It's not just like EA Sports. Now it's like some dirtbag that owns a used car dealership in the South wants to give a kid a couple $1 million to come there and play football. So they say it's part of the name, image, and likeness. So I think what happened with good intention is the legislation hasn't caught up to the good intention. And right now we're in this weird period where there's just a lot of nasty kind of things happening. Hopefully that was a good intro.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you're more researched than me on this topic for sure. But when Frank talks about the Fab Five, so I lived in Michigan at the time. They were a phenomena, but they were like a global phenomena. They were the first kids coming in wearing their pants real baggy. They were all black socks. They were just different than they kind of did things different. But the thing, they became kind of global icons pretty quick as freshmen. There's a really cool story that Chris Webber, he was the best of the five. He and Juwan Howard were out on campus, and the two of them were broke. Like they didn't have any money. They're college kids, right? Chris Webber's from Detroit, and they're just broke college kids. At the time, full ride meant you got room and board. You didn't get money. And here they are, these like global icons, and they're at Subway or Jimmy John's. I think it was Jimmy John's. They didn't have enough money between the two of them to get sandwiches. So they ordered day old bread. like this. Weber tells a story on a podcast all the time. They ordered day-old bread. So like for $1, you could get like yesterday's bread, and that was their lunch. And they're eating this day-old bread, and they walk by on Ann Arbor's campus,
on-campus store with his jersey in
a
the window.
memorabilia store, and Chris Webber's jersey is in the front window selling for $100, and it says Weber and his jersey number on it. And they just looked at each other like, look at this shit. Like, my jersey sells for $100 and I can't afford a sandwich. Like, that's the extreme where guys like Frank is down in Florida and he loved the Fab Five. Like, we would pay money. We watched TV. I watched every game.
I bought a t-shirt with them on it, like when I was like 15 years old.
So much money was made on their talents, their skill, the hard work they put in the gym, the sacrifices they made. Advertisements were sold on their TV games that people were watching around the country. Like, that's the extreme example of, man, those kids are getting screwed. Like, everyone's profiting off them but them. Where I look at it and I say, that's bullshit. Like, that just because you're in college doesn't mean that you're not part of the capitalist society. They are the product.
Retrospectively, it makes a lot of sense, right? So you were talking about global. They had this incredible freshman year, and their coach is this incredible coach. He's gone on to coach. He was the college coach at San Diego who coached
Fisher,
Kawhi Leonard. He's an incredible coach.
Yeah, Coach
but
Fisher's awesome.
He knew these kids were in this moment, and he took them to Italy. I don't know if you know this part of the story. He took the whole team to Italy, and they got mobbed. Like, Italy doesn't really pay attention to college basketball, but to show you how transcendent these kids were, they got mobbed as 19.
This was like 94. This was shortly after the Dream Team. So basketball had gone global, and everyone in the world was paying attention to basketball now because of what Jordan and the Dream Team did. So 100%.
Yeah. So they got mobbed. And then what was really interesting is that happened in Italy. I was in Italy my senior year, and this is the same year Chris Webber called that timeout. And I remember, like, in the run up to that, I was like trying to find a place to watch the game because it was like such a big deal. It was in the middle of the morning because it was like we were 6 hours ahead. But the point is, like, this took us by storm. But that's kind of the Fab Five. These were the seeds that eventually,
Yeah, these were the seeds. So I tell that story only because it is now morphed. So 2021 Supreme Court judgment, NIL comes out. College players can make money on their name, image, and likeness. And it is now morphed into high school kids are getting offered millions of dollars before they've done anything, before they have a name, image, or likeness, before they've really produced anything on the field. And it's being used. It's not even just car dealerships, Frank. That's kind of how it's being funneled, but that even car dealership, I might as well be a car wash, like in Breaking Bad. I mean, it feels like it's getting funneled to them on how to recruit. There are now co-ops. Like, so, these alumni associations are building LLCs that are cooperatives where they funnel money in. And then for a limited amount of services, you can make $200,000-$300,000 a month if you're a superstar. And they're doing that for the big name schools to recruit against each other.
So I think what it was intended to be good, it's not, and it's being interpreted, but lack of definition, a vacuum is created. And inside of a vacuum, people make assumptions.
So the story Frank and I are going to talk about as a kid.
Before we get into him, I want to do two quick things. So there's really cool stuff, like prime stuff, like EA Sports for Tim Tebow. If it was allowed back then, like, he was on the cover. Like, that's like big business. And that's the kind of thing that people thought would happen. But what happened instead is there's a kid named DeColdis Crawford, and he went to Nebraska. Now, this is actually kind of clever. An HVAC company hired him as an NIL because his name is DeColdest, and they gave him like an NIL deal. So, like, there's things like the big primo brands, and there's the local stuff. But then there's also these people who are kind of filling it in. The way it's legislated currently is the universities can't touch this. People associated with the universities can, which makes it dirty, but the universities are not allowed to be working with, they're not allowed to pay the students because of NCAA rules. So that's where these collectives and these things come up.
For the people that watch us on YouTube, you have to love when Frank does the Italian thing where he holds his fingers and a fingertip like he's holding a rose in his hand, and he does this at the camera like he's his grandma talking to him about, how much you want, some extra garlic and the lasagna.
Yes.
Sorry, you do it all the time, and I just absolutely love it. You put it right to the camera. It's really good.
I don't even know I'm doing it. I'm thinking.
You don't even know you're doing it. You couldn't. If Frank's hands were cut off, he would not be able to talk. He would literally become a mute. He couldn't do it.
So this is where the story gets interesting. This kid is supposed, his name is Jaden Rashada, who we're going to talk about, right? He's the 7th rated quarterback in his class. He just graduated. Now, everybody says he's a nice and humble kid. He's played all over the place. He was in California as a freshman. As a sophomore, he played at IMG Academy in Florida. Then he went back to Northern California and played at a different school, which really seems kind of tumultuous to start, which when I look at it, like you have 3 high schools as a 15 to 18-year-old kid, it's kind of crazy.
That's normally a sign of an overzealous parent.
Right. And the thing that's interesting about this is this. He's the 7th rated quarterback. The 1st rated quarterback is the only person who's been talked about this recruiting cycle more than him, and his name is Arch Manning. Arch Manning is the son or the grandson of a Hall of Fame or an Archie Manning, and he's got 2 uncles that are Pro Bowl / Hall of Famers in Eli and Peyton, right? So he's like, this kid's got all the bloodline, and the only person who's been talked about in this recruiting cycle as much as this kid is the 7th rated quarterback. Like 2 through 6 aren't talked about at all, and he's like somewhere between the 40th and the 87th rated kid out of high school. So there's something happening with this NIL, and Ian's kind of going to the parent piece. So it seems like something seems amiss to start.
When did you find out about this kid getting recruited?
Right after he switched from Miami to Florida.
Okay, so it starts with he's being recruited. It's a normal recruiting process, and all the usual suspects are talking to him, right? All the big SEC schools, and he's kind of focusing in. He's honing in on the Big Ten and SEC schools, and then it takes a turn where Miami seems to have locked him down. He sends a tweet out saying, "I'm excited to be going to Miami." And right around the same time, it comes out that he signed an NIL deal for $11 million. So this is as big of an NIL deal ever for someone who hasn't signed yet. And he hasn't signed yet. So this is before national signing period. So you're kind of starting to see how seedy this can get and who's giving him the money and what's expected of him. And then all of his teammates that he was coming in on the recruiting class, they all said, they had like a group chat, and everyone was really active except for Jaden. Like he never said a word in there, and they were all getting the feeling like, does he really want to come to Miami? Like this is going to be our quarterback, and he's hardly ever talking. And they all knew he got this big bag of money, and then he withdraws his name. And then it comes out that NIL deal fell apart. They never made their first payment. And so around that time, all these coaches who hadn't got him start going back after him. And Florida apparently is the place he wanted to play all along. And why he went to Miami, no one's quite sure, because he always had his heart in Florida. And what, he ends up going to Florida. And again, right around the same time, an announcement's made that he signed a $13 million deal with some Florida co-op, which is really just a shady business entity that was formed by rich alumni to go lock down good recruits so they can win a national championship. And as all that's coming out, coaches everywhere saying, like, there were multiple SEC big schools that pulled their offer from him because they said that the dad, that's all they wanted to talk about when they got to campus. I guess dad went and did all these trips with him. That within an hour of every trip, the dad was saying, what kind of NIL money are we getting? He made it all about money. He commoditized his son and the experience, and people were dropping out of the process. So his choice was up to his dad where he was going, and it was going to be where he got the most money, even though the kid didn't really want that.
That's it. So what I think we're going to talk about, kind of pivot to, is, because we know nothing about this except what we've read, is when you take money, and money is the number one indicator. So I think there's two really interesting avenues to go down. when all you chase is money, or if you think you're ready for something and you chase it because there's more money at the end of it, but it's an opportunity or something, and you're really not ready for it. So like, let's get into the first one, Ian. Let's like, when people have done things publicly for the money, a great example of this is Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was the coach of the Bulls, won 6 championships. I think he went and won 5 with the Lakers. So he's won 11 championships as a coach, and he's worked with 2 of the most incredible organizations in basketball. He's late 60s at this point, early 70s, and he moves from LA, where he's dating the owner's daughter, or now owner of the Lakers, and he moves back to New York to become a high-level executive with a grease fire called the New York Knicks. The only reason he took that job is it had a huge paycheck, and he took it. And what happened is 3 years later, he was out. The team was terrible. He couldn't bring the magic because he didn't chase after the right management or the right structure or the right opportunity. He just chased the money. So this is a sports example about someone making the wrong choice based upon money.
So I have an example in business. This is around 2009, I think. 2009. No, sorry. When did the big refi boom happen? 10 and 11, when rates just plummeted. It was right after the financial crisis because rates plummeted. So maybe around 10. There was just a huge refinance boom because rates had gone, unlike what we're going through now, where rates went from 3% to 7% and there's no refinances. At the time, rates had gone from like 6 to 4%. So there was a big refi boom, which meant every mortgage company in the world was hiring, and they were throwing stupid money at people. Big signing bonuses, Frankie, over market salaries, anything you could think of to lure talent away, especially underwriters and loan processors, people on the inside staff, because loan officers, they didn't need more loan officers. It was easy to get business. They had more business than they could even process and get closed. They didn't have enough operational folks. So at the time we had a young girl, and she was, God, Frank, she could have been maybe 22, 23. And she didn't have a college degree. She had kind of dropped out of college, and she was bouncing around crappy jobs. We might've got her from a restaurant, but she had a great support staff, and she was really high energy, great kid. I really liked this kid. And she had a great supervisor, a great manager over. And at the time we had a really cool office in Northern Virginia, good people that taught her the business. And, we taught her from the ground up. So she came in, she would have taken minimum wage. She was, really wanted, but we paid her more than that. I think at the time it was like $35,000, but she got like 3 pay raises in maybe a year and a half learning the business. But she still wasn't one of our best processors. She was a year and a half into the business, but she had a great attitude, great energy. We loved her. Great teammate. Mortgage company, all the banks were calling us every day, just recruiters pounding the lines. And she gets a call, and they offer her something stupid like $80,000. And at the time she was making 40 something. And this is, at the time, even was 20,000 more than what a loan processor made a good one when you went out and recruited. And they were just desperate. They just wanted people in. And I remember she came in and she was so full of herself. She was like, and it was really irritating me because we had invested a ton into this kid just in a year and a half to teach her the business. She came in, she was like, I need you to match it or I'm going. And we were like, no, we're not matching that. That's more than anyone on our team makes, especially all the people that taught you the business. So no, but I remember looking at her and saying, listen to me, that's about as high a price you will ever get for a loan processor. I got a question for you. I see you in people's cubicles all day asking questions. I see you asking questions all day of your supervisor and your manager. And we're very patient, and we answer those questions because we know where you came from. We know that you just learned the business. When you get there making $80,000, how much patience will they have when you don't have answers? When someone pays you $80,000 above market, they expect you to know the answers. They expect you to know everything. And so be careful, you're chasing money before you're probably ready for it. And Frankie, she went over there, and 4 months later, they let her go because she impressed them in an interview. She worked for a good company, and they threw money at her. And by the way, the refi slowed a little. and she wasn't nearly as productive as other people. And I think they got irritated really quick. Then she didn't have all the answers, and she kind of made them feel that way. So a lot of times people, they think, oh, I got offered the money, so I must be worth it. No, you fooled someone. That's all you did. You fooled someone.
So with Jaden Rashada, what happened to him is he made a commitment to go to Florida where he's going to get this huge check. And he's literally going to get $300,000 and $400,000 a month as a college kid, which is asinine.
Asinine. It's asinine for anyone to make that money, but
that's asinine for us. Like that's like that. That's like,
it's asinine. You can't even spend that.
It's a ton of money. So what happened with him is in college, you can't sign your letters of intent to make it official that you're going to go to a school until a certain window of time. So he made these commitments. He had all these things in writing, supposedly, but he couldn't physically commit to Florida because it was outside of the window of time.
Yeah.
So in that time, he went back to being an 18 and 19-year-old high school kid, and he went to these camps. And the same thing happened to him that happened to this recruit, the one that Ian was just talking about, this processor. He didn't perform because he had all this weight on his shoulders, and he started throwing the balls in the dirt. And like, he came in with all this hype, and they walked out and were like, there's 11 kids here. This kid's 11th. So what happened is the pressure started to get
all
to
the kids were asking him about his money while he was there. That's all they wanted to talk. He was no longer Jaden. He was the kid with the $11 million deal.
So what happened in this instance is Ian brought up the point about the overzealous parents. I didn't really, I read that. I didn't feel that as much, but I get it right now. But there's another side of this, and this is what is often missed. Kids who do this in college, like, God bless you, take the money. And most of these kids grow up with very little. Like, I'm all for it. Like, get what you can. But what are you really chasing? Are you chasing a career? Or are you chasing a couple of years? So in this kid's instance, $13 million is like the same amount of money that like Daniel Jones makes playing for the Giants over a 4-year contract. Like, something's amiss. Like, he doesn't have the same value. He doesn't have the same experience. There's a gift that I was given in life. It didn't feel like a gift at the time, but I remember being 25, 24, 25, 26, somewhere in there. And I went to my boss. I said, I'm ready to be promoted. And he sat me down. He took me to a nice lunch. I was still in the field. So like, this was a big deal. I never went to lunch. I was worried about my job site while I was sitting there. And he goes, Frank, he goes, you're going to have an incredible career. He goes, but you're not ready. He goes, you think you're ready. You're not. I'm telling you, you can put your name in the hat for this position and you're probably going to get it, but it's not going to be the best move for you. What you need to do is you need to rescind your decision to interview and work a little bit longer, work a little bit harder, get more skills, get to a different job site, prove yourself a second and a third time. And he goes, when you do that, you're going to have more to talk to people about and you're going to be ready. He goes, you're just not ready. And he goes, it's going to be very hard to hear right now, but you're not. And this is what happened. I took his advice and I listened to it. A few months go by, I think it was 6 to 12 months. I got the job that I wanted a year earlier. And he was right. I flew through that next position. I moved on to something else because I had a really deep background of it. Same thing happened to me about 5 years later when I was thinking about quitting. I had a headhunter call me and another guy told me, he said, look, your resume is like this close to being incredible. You're almost to a point where if you put 3 or 4 more years in, you could do anything. You're just not quite there yet. Had I left at either stage, I can look back and say that would have been a huge mistake because I was not fully baked. I wasn't completely ready. What I did is I looked at long-term is going to be way more important than short-term. And I think what's happening with this kid, and I think what's happening with a lot of these people in the NIL situation is they have desperation and they don't have good counsel. And because they don't have good counsel and because they need the money for some reason or another, they're making decisions that's forsaking what's right for now and the skill set for now that's going to prevent you from getting where you could get later.
You know, I do think it's worth sticking on the parents here for a second. And there's one piece of it that I would say, you know, you're always going to have influences in your life that have their opinions based on what they would do in a certain circumstance. And this kid's dad, apparently, money was a big deal and he wanted his son to maximize value, blah, 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 blah. And it's hard for a high school kid. You're kind of
hard to say no to that.
Your dad's kind of your boss. Like he's paying your rent. You're under his roof. So it's hard to just say, screw you, dad, I'm going to do my own thing. I think Frank and I were both blessed with parents that let us go our own way. My mom wasn't telling me to go be a teacher. My dad wasn't telling me to get a job at the mill. They let me figure out what I wanted to do. I completely went an independent path. I went to school outside of college at a university they'd never been to. When I took a job in sales, even though I'd studied for engineering, they didn't question it. They let me go my own path. And I was blessed in that way, and that I kind of real early, I just made my own decisions. I listened to people, but I always had just intuitively, I knew I'm the dude that's going to live with this decision. You're not, so anyone who gave me advice, I would always just listen, but I always just kind of knew I'm the only one that owns this career. No one else gives a shit about the next 50 years of my life. And I do. I care about from the time I'm 21 until the time I'm 71, because I'm going to be working. So I need to make decisions that are going to be best for that 50 years. And Frankie, when I told my dad that I left MVR, I did it after I left. I didn't tell him before. I didn't tell my mom or dad. I sat him down in Florida. This was like first week after I left. We all went down to Florida for a vacation. They thought it was just a normal like Christmas holiday. We were down there, but I was already gone from MVR. I'd been gone for a week and a half. And I sat him down over breakfast and I said, hey, I left MVR. And they just kind of stared at me because they knew what that meant. And I said, here's what I'm thinking of doing next. I'm not sure, which completely freaked my dad out. When I said, I'm not sure. So I got multiple ideas. I'm going to spend a good part of this year finding what I'm going to do next, figuring out what I'm going to do next. And my dad, was like, man, son, they paid you a lot of money. Do you know how hard it is to get it? I'm like, I know exactly how hard it is, Dad. I did it. I know exactly how hard it is to make 7 figures in a year. But I needed to make this decision. And I'll never forget this. He looked at me and he smiled and he said, you didn't ask my opinion because you knew I would have told you not to. I said, I know you would have told me not to, because I've made more in a year than you made in a career in the steel mill. You've told me that before. You've pounded that, but that's your life. That's your decision. And he said, I respect that. He said, you're a man. You made your own decision. I'm sure you're going to figure out and do something good. It makes me nervous, but I can see it doesn't make you nervous. And I'm just blessed that I had parents that cool. But I just remember he smiled and was like, you didn't ask me because you knew I would have said, don't do that. You did your own thing. You made your own decision. You're your own man. You got your own family to worry about. And you made a decision that you thought was best. And, I was blessed that they didn't second guess me. They thought, okay, you're going to figure it out. I'm sure you will.
There's a lot of directions that go with this, but I'm going to kind of wrap up my portion of this podcast with this. I'm a new dad. And you and I were talking a couple minutes ago about something I got to deal with today with kids, and it's real. And what I can tell you is your parents and my parents are very similar in this way. They were flawed people, but they did the best they could for us. They gave us everything they could. Everything that was within their power to make our lives as good as possible, not to spoil us, but to give us what we needed to be successful human beings. They did everything they possibly could for that. And what they did is they set us both up. We both were in a position where we quit the same company, and both of us told our parents later. I quit. My mom called me and I told her 10 days later. She's like, oh, but they knew because they had parented us the right way. They knew because they had watched our decision making and they had seen how we had gotten where we had gotten, that if we made that decision, it was no longer theirs, it was ours. And they never put themselves ahead of us in the process. They always allowed us to make those decisions. Our parents could have jumped in when we were kids. Your parents could have told you, you're not going to Purdue, you're going here. They didn't do that. They said, hey, We've raised Ian since being a young boy to make his own decisions, make his own bed. He'll have to lie in it. And when the time was right, we were ready. And what happened with this kid is he went from a $13 million deal to zero. Now, his story, he's still a young man. He's 19. He may end up becoming a Hall of Fame quarterback. It may be a great story. But what happened was the fundamentals were wrong. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about scaling bad DNA. Our DNA, like I'm built like an offensive lineman. I'm never going to be an underwear model. That's, my DNA. But the point is my parents did everything they could to make my DNA as strong as they could. And I was able to scale it. This kid had all the wrong things behind him. And when he tried to scale it, it fell apart.
I think you could be an underwear model for that Duluth trading. You kind of look like the guy in the cartoons that's always like fighting a bear that's trying to get his underwear off.
There's no doubt.
You could definitely, you got a potential. Don't rule yourself out.
But that's where it comes down to for me is it's the fundamental things that you're given and you take and what you do with them. And I don't know. I talk about this all the time with people. I hit a lottery by just simply being born to my parents. My parents were the right people to craft me to be the best I could possibly be. And I had nothing to do with that. That was just luck. So like having the right support system really gives you I don't know. That's my opinion.
So to finish off Jaden Rashada's story, both of his NIL deals fell apart. The 11 million at Miami and the 13 million at Florida. And Florida, by every report, all of his friends, is where his heart was. That's really where he wanted to be. But because all this happened, it was so embarrassing. And I think the dad's influence, he's not going to get to go to Florida where he really wanted to be. If there were no money involved at all, he would have been happy just going there and being their number one quarterback. He ended up at Arizona State, which was not even on his short list when he started because so many people blackballed him because they thought he had the wrong motivation. So be careful what you ask for when you put money first in your career. I hope Jaden has a 20-year career playing football, and this is just a blip and a good learning experience. But, taking top dollar is usually fool's gold. Normally, there's a lot of stress and anxiety and aggravation that comes with it. Sometimes the slow path to wealth is a much better one with a little bit more grind in it. So that's all I'm going to finish with. Frankie, it was an absolute pleasure. I was wondering if Let Me Speak to a Manager podcast got an NIL deal, who would it be from?
Duluth.
Duluth trading underwear.
Yeah.
So let's put that in the show notes and see if we can have our virtual assistant reach out to them and see if they could be our first advertiser. And maybe we'll do the next one with our shirts off.
No doubt.
Duluth trading in their underwear. We're going to do the next. So you've heard it here first, loyal listeners, Frank and I. Duluth trading. If you call us, we will do the next podcast in your underwear with our shirts off. And the 4 out of 4,000 followers that are women of this show will be super excited about that.
There is no doubt.
If you are one of those loyal listeners and you have not given us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, shame on you. If you are new to our channel and you liked this episode, there's more of that where that came from. Mash that subscribe button and stick with us. Frankie, peace out.
Good to see you.